Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of BPIE and the ComAct project, we would like to welcome you all to this webinar on the energy crisis in Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe, where we will try to find an answer on how to make sure homeowners are better prepared for next winter. And starting with some housekeeping rules, please feel free to type your questions on the Q&A button, and we will take this after the second session where we will have a panel discussion. And if you have any technical issues, please feel free to address this to my colleague Margot. And something important is that all the presentations of today and the recording will be shared with all of you with the next days. So starting with the speakers, I'm Vivian Dorizas. I work for BPIE. I'm a project manager. And our speakers today are Alice Corovessi. She's from INZEB in Greece. She's a co-founder and a managing director of INZEB. It's a non-profit organization active in energy and sustainability research and advocacy activities. And she participates as an expert in various research projects funded by the European Commission, but also other funding instruments, while her personal interest is on social aspects of energy, such as energy poverty mitigation, evolution of energy communities, and energy democracy. Alice serves as the Vice Chair of Renovate Europe campaign for 2022-2023. Welcome, Alice. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Vivian.
And I'm moving on to Giovanni Sgaravatti, who works at Bruegel as energy and climate research analyst. And before joining Bruegel, Giovanni worked in the productivity branch of the Office for National Statistics in the United Kingdom. As a trainee, he worked at the delegation of European Union to Chile and the Business Europe. Welcome, Giovanni.
Thanks.
Nice to have you here. And I'm going to Hanna, Szemzo, who's also our partner at ComAct project, is one of the managing directors of the Metropolitan Research Institute, a private-owned think tank in Budapest. She has over 20 years of experience in research and consultancy in the fields of urban regeneration, social inclusion, demography, welfare, energy efficiency policy, and governance analysis. And recently, she started collaborating with the city municipality of Budapest in Budapest Cares project with the aim to set up a climate agency in the city. Hi, Hanna.
Hello, Vivian. It's wonderful to be here.
Nice to have you too. And it's also a pleasure to have Mathilde Leyge from DG Energy. She was trained at the Paris International Relations Schools. She also graduated from the University of Sherbrooke, where she completed a master's degree in environmental management. From 2008, she joined the French Ministry of Environment on environmental affairs, working at first on sustainable development goals, then assisting during 3 years the diplomatic advisor to the minister. She spent 8 years at the General Directorate of Energy and Climate, working first on bilateral issues and then on energy efficiency at the French White Certificate schemes. Since 2022, she has been policy officers in the Consumer and Just Transition Unit at DG Energy at the European Commission. Welcome, Mathilde.
Thank you.
And we also have my colleague, Rutger from BPIE, who will be chairing the next session and the panel discussion. On today's agenda, just to say a few words on setting the scene and the reflections of thematic policies. And then I will guide you through the agenda one by one when the presentation starts. On setting a little bit the scene, so since Russia's aggression against Ukraine in early 2022, the question of the European Union on energy dependency from fuels import has been in front of the political and social debates. And together with the skyrocketing energy prices, but also the inflation, every one of us has felt the economic and social changes which are evident due to this crisis. And the result of that, the EU debate shifted towards affordable energy supply, which sometimes it also even comes at the cost of the reduced or slowed down climate action. On the good side of things, we have the European Commission that has recognized more explicitly the specific segments of the population that live on energy poverty. And the good side is that they gave an official definition of the energy poverty, which has as main causes the low income, the low energy efficiency, the high energy prices. Here on the current state on energy poverty, we see that there is a very uneven spread of energy poverty throughout the EU, and we have the Southern and Eastern Europe that are being more affected. And a bit on the energy, on the EU policies, policy context, there are several policies that are referring to energy poverty, such as the Electricity Directive, the EPPD, the Governance Regulation, the Social Climate Fund. Still, work needs to be done on that direction, but having a definition to acknowledge energy poverty as a problem is a good start. So now we will pass on to the main agenda and to the main speakers. And I would like to welcome Giovanni Sgaravatti to speak on the national fiscal policy responses to the energy crisis. And Giovanni, I'm stopping to share my screen, so feel free to share your own screen.
Thank you very much, Vivian. Let me share. Hopefully you see the screen with the slides. So let me present. Okay. So, well, first of all, I'm Giovanni Sgaravatti. I work in Bruegel, and together with Simone Tagliapietra, Georg Zachman, and Cecilia Trasi, we have been following the response of governments in Europe, including the UK and Norway, since summer 2021, in terms of subsidies to families and businesses. So today I'll give you just a brief overview of what we have seen so far and what is to come, in our opinion, at least. So what has happened? So first of all, well, the bill is raising quite dramatically, with governments having earmarked and allocated funding up to 646 billion in the European Union since September 2021. This is our tracking up to January this year, so it excludes new funding since then. But as you can see here in the graph, on the y-axis, you have the percentage of GDP devoted to these measures to shield consumers and firms, and you see that it ranges anywhere between 1% up to 9%. Is really a wide range of support, and also the allocated and earmarked funding on the x-axis varied a lot, with, of course, countries with more fiscal capacity and firepower, like Germany, earmarking higher amounts. And not all the spending has been exactly allocated in the same fashion, of course. Here you can see a split that we did, trying to assess what has been untargeted, what has been targeted, and then what has been price support, therefore decreasing the price of energy commodities, or what has been income support, and therefore vouchers or lump sum transfers. This excludes the pie chart, the 200 billion from Germany, because yeah, it's only, we are only now getting some clarity on exactly all the expense items of that package. So we hold off from putting it in the pie chart, but we will add it soon. But in any case, you can see the core message here is that the vast majority of the support measures has been untargeted price measures. To date, targeted policies have represented only 27% of the total funding disbursed, while untargeted ones accounted for the remaining 73%. And this type of measures have multiple drawbacks, among which they reduce the incentive to save energy, propping up consumer demand, and also, as anticipated also by Vivian, they go in contrast with the commitments to the energy transition. Among the multiple drawbacks, because of course, the other major issue is that these are not necessarily equitable among the society. For example, in some countries, an OECD study found that excise duty cuts were benefiting more high-income families because they owned, less energy-efficient cars, so big SUVs, more cars per household, and therefore that type of policy was benefiting them more than low-income families. Or another example might be a family with a pool in the garden that they needed to warm up. Of course, if there is a cut on VAT, on energy, for example, energy taxes or whatsoever, then they will benefit in absolute terms at least much more than a small apartment where a low-income family might be living in. Then also these measures are politically hard to discontinue. We have seen the case, for example, in my country, in Italy, when the excise duty cut was dismissed on oil. Then it caused quite a bit of commotion, and they might, increase the period of high inflation, because while they help to keep inflation down in the short term, limiting also second round effects, then in the long term, of course, sooner or later they have to be dismissed, given the really high price tag attached to these measures, and therefore the fiscal burden on governments. And therefore, when they are dismissed, this has a upward effect on energy inflation. So I'll focus just on two of all these drawbacks. One being the incentive to reduce energy consumption, because of course we found ourselves in the past year and a half, almost 2 years now, in a supply and demand imbalance, especially for natural gas, which propped up prices also for electricity, given well, the electricity market design, but also past investment decisions that make the natural gas power plant the marginal price setter in most countries in multiple hours throughout the day. And therefore, if you don't decrease demand, then the prices will stay very much elevated. And here in the chart, I graphed on the y-axis what has been the retail gas price increase, a weighted average for industries and households in the first quarter of 2022 versus the first quarter of an average between 2019 and 2022. Then the natural gas price, the natural gas demand response, always a weighted average between industry and households. And you see that in the countries where the retail gas price increased the most, then also the natural gas demand decreased. So the higher the price, of course, the lower the demand. And therefore, policies such as price caps prevent this pass-through from the wholesale market to retail prices. Basically, the effect is what I was saying before. So what is the other option? Well, we have been advocates for a long time to provide targeted support to vulnerable consumers, which doesn't mean to necessarily narrow down the support to just a small percentile of citizens in some countries, but it can be up to, for example, the bottom 40% of European households. And the IMF estimated that shielding completely from the price increase, this 40% of European households would have costed less than 1% of GDP in 2022 and 1.2% in 2023, against what we have seen before of a range between 1 and 9% of GDP. So it would have costed much less with also benefits on the energy price for everyone. Now, of course, there is a bunch of constraints in doing targeted support, but for time constraints here of my presentation, I won't dig into them right now, but happy to take questions if there are any. And the other drawback that I wanted to focus on today is the energy transition. The OECD estimated that 70% of these energy crisis support measures were actual fossil fuel subsidies. Because, of course, if you decrease taxation on natural gas, that's a fossil fuel support measure. If you reduce excise duties on petrol, diesel, that's also fossil fuel subsidy, etc. So what the ECB, the IMF, and a lot of different major institutions have been advocating for is a framework of measures being tailored, targeted, and temporary, which is, we very much agree, at the best framework you can have in the time of a crisis. What we believe now is the time to do is to move from that crisis framework to a more permanent framework that also helps the green transition. We call it a green triple T criteria framework. And here in the graph, you can see just the emissions from a bunch of different sectors. And you see buildings are really important in the way on total greenhouse gases emissions. And this is the line you see there, the brown line, excludes construction. So if you also included the construction sector, that of course is necessary to build the buildings, and the waste management linked to buildings, you get to about 32, if I remember correctly, 40% of energy consumption and 36% of emissions of the EU overall. So it's more than a third of overall emissions, and therefore this is very much a focus to speed up the transition. Buildings need to be at the core of our efforts to the green transition. An example of a measure, and then I'll wrap up, that we believed touched all these three green and triple T criteria is this measure rolled out by the Austrian government called Clean Heating for All, which grants up to 100% of the total cost of replacing fossil fuel with climate-friendly heating systems. And the coverage rate varied according to the income level and the family size of the household. And it was targeted only to those in the lowest 3 deciles of the income distribution. The bonus could be combined with other local initiatives and incentives for solar energy. So I believe this is the way forward and how measures should be designed going forward, while fossil fuel supports and subsidies have to be phased out as fast as we can. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, for this enlightening presentation on fiscal policy responses. And now I would like to welcome Hanna. She will be reflecting on the impacts on the energy crisis on Southern Eastern European countries and also showing the examples of our ComAct pilots. Please, Hanna.
Okay. Thank you, Vivian, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Actually, it won't be, I think I really loved the presentation before, so I think that's going to be very big shoes to fill, but I hope I manage. Please allow me just a second. It always takes a bit of time until my computer is set up. Okay, so I will focus a bit on reflecting the impact of the energy crisis in the Central and Eastern European countries, mostly in Hungary. I also try to gather data, but as Vivian has already mentioned, the data I will use is from the ComAct project, which is actually an Age 2020 project focusing on tailored actions to mitigate energy poverty. I think this is something I wanted to insert a slide a bit about why CEE countries are so special. I mean, at least let's put it that way, that they form a very significant group and that it makes sense to take one of these specialties into consideration when designing policies. First of all, there is a very, very high home ownership rate because of the privatization process. And this has two consequences: a not very flexible housing market on the one hand, and second of all, a lot of poor homeowners that would need to, that not only need to pay the energy prices, but only would need to cover the investments if they want to improve the energy efficiency of their buildings, which are often outdated and that result in higher energy consumption. And I think would like to much emphasize the third point. This is still an area, it's changing slowly, where elections are still won or can be won with the help of energy prices. One of the best examples in Hungary, where there, even before or mostly actually before the war and the energy crisis, there was a price cap on energy because of its strong political importance. So that really would be categorized to one of the untargeted subsidies that we heard in the previous presentation that are not very good. And finally, this is why it's very important. This is a region that was, at least before the war, very much tiled. tied to Russian gas. So this is just the setting the scene. Our knowledge that I would want to talk a bit about is what we know about the pre-crisis comes from a survey we did together in our ComAct project that was implemented in 2021. So right before the energy prices started to increase, on a sample of 1,000 households that dispersed around 5 countries. What's important to know is that they were worse than average and multi-family buildings. So no single family homes were included, which actually are very problematic, I think, in this post-crisis area. But the countries were Hungary, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, Ukraine, and Lithuania, so very much the CEE region. I think some of the lessons that I actually wanted to emphasize, and I think it also goes back a bit to again, to Giovanni's presentation about non-targeted subsidies, that if you look at the dark blue columns, that shows if the energy costs would consume more than 15% of the income of the households. And of course, it was very typical in Ukraine, but otherwise in countries like Hungary, which had this general, very expensive and non-targeted subsidies, that's relatively low, even though it's a relatively poor country. If you look at the charts, you can also see that the energy poverty problem is often in poor country, in colder countries like Lithuania and Hungary. It's often the problem. The problem is that you are not able to keep your home comfortably cool in the summer, whereas in warmer countries like Bulgaria, the problem often becomes, to keep the home adequately warm in the winter. That also actually very much shows to what extent energy poverty and the problems with energy are tied to technical and existing infrastructures. The reason why in Hungary and Lithuania you don't have so much problem keeping your energy, your home warm enough in the winter, because the infrastructure, the heating infrastructure is put in place. I think the most, it's very interesting. So who in this pre-crisis area, who was mostly affected by energy poverty? We had a lot of very interesting outcomes, but something that I think is but could be headlined very importantly, and that's very much significant for this multi-unit building or worse of multi-unit building, are elderly women who live alone. And I think it's something that the policies need to take into consideration. And if we think through logically, that's that the reason is that women still tend to live longer, but they always in their life they typically had lower incomes, so it becomes very difficult for them to maintain their apartment, living alone, one pension that's low anyways. And I think that leads me a bit to this post-crisis environment. It's first, please allow me to admit that this is not my research. What I'm going to quote here, it's from the Institute for European Environmental Policy. They just did a study. In my next slide, you will have the link to the study. And so the question is it's not only that even pre-crisis had a gender dimension to energy poverty and the question of energy prices, but post-crisis also had. And I think it's very important to see that if men are generally more affected because they typically tend to use cars more often. So if you add up if you include the increase of fuel prices and for transport into the equilibrium, then men are more affected. However, if you only focus on households, then it becomes women who have been more affected overall in Europe by the energy prices. So this means that if you look at electricity and heating prices, then it's women. And that also goes back to what I mentioned before, that they still tend to earn less than men. This is again a table. This is also from the same research from the Institute for European Environmental Policy. As you can see, and this is just part of a table, this is how I managed to cut out, but it basically shows the percentage of increase in each country for electricity, natural gas, you know, diesel, petrol, or liquid heating. I will talk a bit about Hungary later on, so it makes sense that, you know, natural gas was increased, but overall, as you see, the increases have been staggering everywhere, often reaching 50, 70, and even over 100%. Like if you look at Lithuania, for example, about natural gas, and the ability of countries really differed in each region to contain it. If you now, I will talk about in this post-crisis countries. What I wanted to say that is that sometimes if you look at the big picture, there seems to be a very big increase. I will go back again. You see Hungary, and it says that natural gas has increased by almost 50%, and the electricity increase was a bit less because it was only 10%. But if we go into the details, what you see that this affected people very differently. I mean, overall in the CE region, caps were introduced everywhere. What's quite interesting in the Hungarian case, that the cap was actually loosened because there were no budgetary resources to maintain the very generous subsidy system. But what they did, and that I think had very important social consequences, that there was a relatively low threshold where there was no increase. But once you've reached this threshold for the gas, it meant that you paid 7 times more. When you look at the details, you could see that this threshold was often not met. For people living in multifamily buildings could actually often keep their consumption below the threshold. However, people in single family homes were strongly affected, precisely because what was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that they are typically, often people are not affluent. I think that's a big difference. If you if you have your mental imagery of a single family homeowner in Germany, someone who's affluent, that's not the mental imagery that you should have once you go to a CE region. So all these single family homes were affected, and that was a very rapid change. So there was actually no time for preparation. That was one problem. The other very big difficulty is even people who started because of the previous subsidies on electricity, people who actually converted their heating system to electricity found themselves in a very strange situation. So there were caps on gas, and there were caps on electricity, but the difficulty was that this cap did not increase in case you use electricity both for your home appliances and heating. So people who actually were climate conscious beforehand were very negatively affected by this regulation. There was an overall consumption reductions, but my guess is that a lot of this reduction was out of precaution and fear. So the next winter will tell how people will react. I think what's also very important to keep in mind, and that what's important for us in the ComAct project, is to see how all these changes will influence the willingness of households to renovate. This is a question, I mean, on the one hand, it's a very unlucky situation that we had the survey right before the increase of energy crisis on the energy prices. On the other hand, we find it also lucky we will have in another project, as part of another project, a new survey in Budapest, so we will be able to compare how this willingness has changed. What we saw beforehand is that what we would actually logically think, that income really matters. So you need subsidies for people to actually be willing to transform and convert to new technologies and insulate their buildings. And often age matters, that elderly over 60 people seem to be less willing to invest. Currently, there are no subsidies available for multifamily units, and there is actually nothing even for single family homes in Hungary. But should the current price structure remain, which on the one hand is very much an untargeted subsidy, then it becomes very harsh on people, on single family homeowners. Then I would expect an increase of investments, even without very specific subsidies. But I think we will know a lot more in the next winter or autumn. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I kept the time.
Thank you, Hanna. Thank you so much for presenting all these very interesting results of the survey. Okay, and now I would like to welcome Alice Corovessi to present on reflecting on the impacts of the energy crisis on southern countries and examples from Greece. Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vivian. And while sharing my presentation, just to say that both presentations already shared with us raised a lot of questions and a lot of debates. But let's discuss it when we are going to be at the Q&A session. Please confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So, coming from the south part of Europe, I will share some examples from Greece on how we reflected on the impacts of the energy crisis. Before that, I will share some facts just to present the current situation and what is happening in terms of income, in terms of energy poverty rates in our country. I am sharing now a very recent graph coming from Statista. It was published on 14th of April this year, showing the increase and the decrease of the income of the Greek households. We see that we had a huge income based on the previous years, of course, during the 2008 year, 2006, 2008, and after the financial recession and the economic crisis started in Greece, and we see how the income starts falling down. Even though the situation is considered to be better, we are not having the same income as the previous year. So it needs more effort to reach, let's say, the levels of 2008. To my opinion, an annual income of approximately 27,000 euros. This graph presents the income in dollars, as it is a copy-paste. I'm keeping the source. This income is not sufficient to cover the needs, considering the high prices, not only in energy, but in other goods as well. Energy poverty facts, I'm sharing a screenshot from Eurostat showing, first of all, with the dark blue line, the inability to keep the dwellings warm in Greece. Even though we had the financial recession after we had the COVID, now we are facing the energy crisis. Even though they are saying that the energy crisis is about to stop, there is still energy crisis and we don't know what will happen next winter. We see that the energy poverty rates and the inability to keep the dwellings warm here in Greece, it's much more higher compared to the EU average. The same is happening with the delays in paying the energy bills on time. We see here that in 2016, approximately 1 out of 2 households were unable to pay the energy bills on time. And even though now it's 2023, the statistics are not very promising. In 2021, 1 out of 4 households were unable to pay the energy bill on time, and we had tremendous delays paying the bills. Again, comparing this data, the Greek data, with the EU average, we see very high loops. So this means that the country, of course, this is something that I'm not sharing first time. This is something that we know, that Greece is among the countries with high energy poverty rates. Some other statistics about the building status, because this is definitely well connected with the energy poverty rates. According to the Foundation for Economic and Industrial Research, an organization based here in Greece, 2018, these are the statistics, but Since then, no major changes have happened. We have 3 million Greek homes, approximately 45% of the total houses, that they have no insulation. The majority of them were built before 1981, because 1981 was a milestone. The new regulation for insulation was launched, but even the launch of the regulation, the next decade, between 1801 and 90, no major changes have happened with insulation. On the other hand, we have 26% of the Greek homes that have only double glazing, while it is monitored that only 15% of the Greek homes have double glazing and external insulation. And these are mainly houses that they have been after 1990 or the 2000 year. Meaning that we have a very energy poor building stock here in our country. And I'm sharing only data for Greek homes because this is the majority of the building stock here in Greece. The other building types, I mean commercial types or hotels, are just a small percentage of the building stock that we have in the country. So one screenshot is in Greek, the other one is in English. Let me translate the Greek one. 2.2 million building units will be frozen. And these were the announcements after the approval of the EPPD revision by the the European Parliament in March 2023, meaning that we have 2.2 building units in our country that actually will be out of the market because of the new regulation that is coming with the EPPD. Very bad conditions, energy poor buildings that they need a lot of money, and as it is monitored by the Association of Building Owners. Just to clarify something, in Greece, we do not have social housing, so we are discussing only with individual building owners, homeowners actually, meaning that everybody believes that their properties will be out of the market, they are requiring changes, or they are not going to accept what is going to be made after 2028 and 2030. And this actually describes the condition, the bad condition of the properties here in Greece. Some examples that I'm going to share that they are considered, let's say, a response to the energy crisis. On May 17th, 2023, before the Greek elections that we had on the 21st of May this year, the Minister of Environment and Energy has decided to extend all the institutional interventions, both for the wholesale and the retail electricity market. We had this framework that was adopted last August in 2022, which actually expires on July 1st, but now what has been announced, it is that it's going to be extended by the end of September. And just yesterday they announced that probably, it was announced by the temporary government, that probably this institutional framework is going to be available in October, for October as well. Based on the current framework and what we have as information is that the following emergency measures are going to be extended. Actually 4 measures: the mechanism for the recovery of revenues from power generators on the wholesale market. And translating this is the cap on the compensation prices for power generation technologies. On the other hand, we have the granting of subsidies on electricity bills if and when deemed necessary, the suspension of the adjustment clause in electricity bills, and of course the possibility of consumers moving from one supplier to another without the imposition of a financial penalty. What was said yesterday afternoon, that's why I have not placed this information in my presentation, is that some of these emergency measures will be kept even after the extension of the the 30th of September, and will keep and will be in the market even after that. On the other hand, we are not sure about granting of subsidies, because since June 1st, it has been monitored that we have a drop in the electricity prices. So they need to redesign or to rethink about granting the electricity bills, providing subsidies to the homeowners and the businesses as well. So April 2023, just an example, the electricity consumption subsidy for the households on that month for monthly consumption up to 500 kilowatt hours was 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. The electricity tariffs that have been announced by the providers started at 10.4 cents. So the minimum rate that we had dropped to 8.9 cents per kilowatt hour. 90% of the households belong to this consumption category, meaning that 90% of the households have been subsidized, and they have, let's say, somehow protected from the increase of the electricity prices. The subsidy from the social domestic tariff was set to 5.4 cents, per kilowatt hour, and the subsidy for farmers is much more less, it's 1.5 cents. And at the end, the amount paid in subsidies in April 2023, financed mainly by the taxation of energy companies and the auctions of carbon dioxide emissions, and the amount was approximately 25 million euros. This is a very high number, 25 million euros. To our opinion, all this money should have been given to renovation, because subsidizing this kind of issues and this kind of emergency is something temporary. On the other hand, if I may add some opinion from our side as INZEB, sometimes it is necessary to move to such measures, because it's impossible to face or to protect the consumers with other interventions or other measures like renovation, because those need time. In any case, things should move forward and consider that probably energy crisis will happen in the near future. So we need to proceed quicker to protect the consumers, not only the vulnerable ones, but all consumers, considering also that we have a high energy poverty rate in our country. Another measure, which is not an example exactly that is a response to the energy crisis, but was announced after the energy crisis, and we can consider such a thing, is the replacement and recycle for the water heaters. This is a program that was announced just 2-3 months before this year. This is a program that promotes the replacement of electric water heaters with new solar water heaters, and it aims to reduce the energy needs of the buildings, to save a lot of energy costs for citizens, and at the same time achieve a clean environment in the cities. According to the program, approximately 120,000 households will benefit and will be able to get a subsidy to replace their energy-intensive electric water heaters with the new ones. The fact, which is not a good fact, is that about 5 million houses do not have solar water heaters. That means that those households are not eligible to be part of the program, because the program is about replacing the existing one, recycle them, and install the new heaters. That means that the majority of the households are not eligible for that. Of course, what is needed is a quicker formulation of a national plan. We have some here in Greece, so solar heater is something cheap, and it's something that definitely can save energy and support households, not only the vulnerable ones, to save a good amount of a cost for hot water and for other things that the solar heater water heaters provide. So this program needs to be changed a little bit and framed according to the needs that we have in our country. Another example that is under operation at the moment is another program, the installation of the rooftop PVs 2023. Again, this program is under operation the last 2 months. Concerns only households and farmers, not businesses, because for businesses another program will be announced very soon, and I assume after the elections that we have in less than 10 days from now. We have a subsidy rate that range between 40 to 60% of the total cost and up to 16,000 euros. The total budget that is available for this program is 200 million, and the subsidy for the photovoltaic system reaches up to 75% for households and 60% for the farmers. We have also a subsidy for the batteries, which is part of this program. It's 90% and 100% depending on the income category, while the total subsidy for the photovoltaic system with a battery can reach up to 60,000 euros for households and 10,000 euros for farmers. What is announced and what is foreseen is that the beneficiaries of the scheme will be able to see savings on their electricity bills of up to 3,000 euros per year. In addition, for the specific program, there is a special care for the vulnerable households, and there is an allocation of 35 million euros exclusively for them. With this, there is a special bonus 10% for people with disabilities, single parent families, and large families. If you ask my opinion about this program, if it's good or not, my opinion is that this program is, let's say, 50% good, because it's a first come, first served program. There is not a provision to install the photovoltaics in the rooftop for those buildings that have been renovated through other programs. So even a non-renovated and non-energy upgraded building is eligible to be part. But on the other hand, if we consider the households, the vulnerable ones or the low income ones, I'm not sure that those people and those households will think about participating in this program, because if the total cost is up to 16,000 euros and we have a subsidy which is approximately 75%, this means that many households will not be able to pay the rest of the amount that is necessary so as to be eligible for taking place in this program. Another example is the building renovation. We have a program here in Greece that is called I'm Saving at Home or I'm Saving. It's a specific program that is under operation for the last 10, 12 years. It's a good sign, and from some reports from the JRC, this program is considered among the good ones and as a best practice. But if we go deeper on this program, just to say that the plan is for the period 2021-2030 is to upgrade 60,000 households per year, 600 households for this decade. The latest versions of the program consider also vulnerability factors, so there are provisions for that. On the other hand, the previous years, and especially during the period with the financial recession and the economic crisis, many households have been rejected because they were not eligible to take a grant or a bank loan for the rest of the program, of the subsidy program. So only the ones that had a good financial position took advantage of that. And here are some facts that from the period of 5 years, 2016-2020, before the announcement of the 600,000 households, a total of 54,000 houses were renovated, upgraded in the country. This is an average of 11,000 houses per year. If you want to meet the national targets as those have been set, the National Energy and Climate Plan and the other documents that are necessary to be provided and are required by the European Commission, we need approximately 120,000 households per year to be renovated, upgraded, if we want to see a reasonable result in a period of 20-30 years, if you want to meet the carbon neutrality objective by 2050, meaning that we need more money, we need more budget, which of course is not available through public funding. Public funding is not enough to renovate 5 million buildings here in Greece, so we need to find other tailored, clever financing mechanism or to give some incentives and some bonus or tax reliefs to building owners if they want to proceed with building innovation by their own. And even though, as I said, the I'm Saving program is considered among the good examples across the European Union countries, there is a lot that needs to be done if we want to meet the targets for 2050 and the national targets, of course. One last program that is announced again very recently, and that is why I have added these examples here, because they are announced at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, so they can be considered as a response to the energy crisis, is the Save Renovate for young people. So this is a new program just for young people between 18 to 39 years old. They need to have 100% ownership of a property and specific financial criteria in order to be eligible to be subsidized up to 35,000 euros for the energy upgrade and renovation of a home. These are the major, let's say, examples or responses to the energy crisis. There are some periods that more announcements are available, but I think that so far I have gave you a clear view both of the current situation that we have financially, energy poverty wise, and buildings wise, and of course with what is available for the building owners, considering the available public funding at the moment. So thank you for your attention. I'm available for questions and for the discussion.
Great, thank you, Alice. Much appreciated. Now the panel discussion starts, so I will also shortly introduce myself again. Thanks to all the speakers, Hanna, Alice, Giovanni for your input, and for Vivian for setting the scene. My name is Rutger Broer, and I will be moderating the panel discussion. And while my colleague Margot is putting the slide up, I would like to ask Mathilde, who is also with us today, to shortly say some words, because Mathilde is working at the General Directorate for Energy and Climate, or has worked there, and she has a broad experience within DG ENER and the European Commission. So we've been talking a lot about the energy crisis and responses of national governments. And I was curious, Mathilde, could you say something about the larger efforts that the European Commission has taken to tackle the energy crisis?
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. And thanks a lot to Giovanni, Hanna, and Alice also for the very good presentations, and for giving us very inside examples of what have been done in the member states. Very shortly, I will introduce myself also. So as you said, I'm a French SNE, meaning that I am detached to the European Commission. I used to work on energy efficiency in France, and now I'm working in the units in charge of consumers, just transition and local initiative. And in this unit, I'm particularly in charge of monitoring the crisis measures and following also all the measures linked to regulated tariffs that have been put in place. And I'm also in charge of energy poverty and of a group that I will share with you afterwards. Maybe to give you an overview of what the European Commission has done since the beginning of the crisis. We heard different measures in the different presentations, and that totally correspond to the EU legal framework and the trend that we wanted to send in the member states also. Meaning that the member states have at their disposal a wide toolbox to help consumers in the crisis, which include income supports, energy voucher, rebates, but also price caps. And I will come back to on this afterwards. During the crisis, we also extended we put in place this temporary crisis framework that allow wider state aid for companies, for example. And it was very important during this crisis to have this enlarged framework for also shielding businesses and companies that were really at risk during the crisis. And we took several emergency measures. For example, this Council regulation of the 6th October 2022, which allowed the member states to put a price cap on inframarginal revenues that brings us more revenues to support consumers and to also to finance their measures on consumers. And also in these regulations, we extended the possibility for having regulated prices for SMEs and households below cost. What I wanted to remind, and Anna, you mentioned it in your presentation, is that, for example, Hungary, they are having currently a regulated price. They had it before the crisis, and they notified it to the Commission because it's totally legal under the EU framework, as they set up it temporary for a transitional period to a more open and liberalized markets. So this possibility was used, for example, by Hungary, and several member states also used this possibility during the crisis to introduce price caps. Some had before, and some introduced, and some that are more liberal than others, like the Netherlands, for example. They put a price cap for households, and it was quite new. So we saw a lot of evolution during this crisis on all these efforts. I'd like to say that regarding Giovanni's presentation, we really share the need for more targeted approach in the measures that were taken during the crisis. We are saying this afterwards, and we know that the reaction had to be very quick at that time. But that's true that now we are seeing all the burden, the financial burden of all these measures on the European GDP. We now really invite the countries to phase out those support measures progressively, of course, and to target them better on the most vulnerable. I think it's really important.
Is that also something that you are perhaps working on, or that you are including in the Commission recommendation on energy poverty? Because I've heard that the Commission is reviewing this recommendation. Are there any lessons that we have drawn from the crisis also featured in this updated recommendation?
Well, yes, we are still working on this energy poverty recommendation that will be published at the end of the year. I'd like to say that minimizing energy poverty and make the transition to net zero affordable for all households and businesses should remain at the core of the EU policy in this. For example, we spoke a lot about decarbonization, but to drive more customers to use less gas, switch away from gas, for example, and it's particularly the case in the Central and Eastern countries. We see that the most vulnerables are coming with more barriers and a high upfront cost and lack of information, and we really want to address it. And it should be an absolute must for the policymakers to avoid that these groups end up as remaining customers and at the greatest risk of facing progressively higher costs for the network maintenance and delivering of gas, for example. By definition, those population will be the customer less well placed to switch to renewable alternatives with the help of policymakers. They need to be more targeted, and we also need more structural measures, as of course incentives for renovations, energy efficiency, demand reduction. This is really at the core of the EU policy.
Thank you so much, Mathilde. I'll come back to you in a minute after I asked the other panelists some questions, specifically also related to this work, this advisory group you mentioned. But first, I would also encourage the participants, if you have any questions, please share them in the chat. We're monitoring this, and I believe that it's always very strong when the participants also voice their own questions to the speakers. In the meantime, I would quickly want to ask Giovanni. You mentioned that that this untargeted support, which was the main share of most money that was reserved by governments, had several drawbacks, and one of the drawbacks you mentioned was this reduction of the incentive to save energy. You showed this table where it showed that in certain countries the energy demand went up after measures were introduced, or did I see that correctly? Could you maybe elaborate shortly on that? We are online again, and Giovanni, to shortly recap my question. So I asked, basically, we saw that the untargeted measures that were implemented by governments had this drawback of reducing the incentive to save gas, and that as a response in some countries the demand went up. Could you elaborate shortly on that?
Yeah, so the demand didn't necessarily go up, but what we have seen is that the savings were much smaller vis-a-vis other countries where, for example, price caps were not introduced. Price cap is really, I think, the type of measure that can give you a clear idea on the reasoning behind that. Of course, if my energy bills are capped at a certain threshold that is exactly as the same consumption of the previous year, then I don't I don't experience the burden of the high energy prices, and therefore I don't have the incentive of decreasing my energy consumption. And this is something we have seen sorry, in Hungary, for example, with the price cap that was already, as Hanna said before, in place before the beginning of the energy crisis, that became so expensive to maintain for the government. Also because people were not actually saving energy as in other countries, then they had to water it down a bit. So yeah, I think that this is why we have been calling for a different type of measures. And also, once you subsidize energy consumption in one country or for one particular category of people, being it the energy intensive industry, being it households, being it whoever, then energy becomes more expensive for everyone else. If you have a countrywide price cap on, for example, gas, then consumption will stay elevated, and therefore, given that gas was a scarce resource, especially during last winter, but also during this year, then gas becomes more expensive for the neighboring countries around. And this reasoning, you can do it also, for example, with ABEC's proposal of the electricity tariff for the energy intensive industries in Germany. If you make electricity cheaper for energy intensive industry, then it will become more expensive for everyone else.
Yeah. So then it trickles down. I see the point indeed. And I think you also referred to this other example where if you provide these subsidies, that you provide them only to specific groups in order to thereby balance this demand more. I just wanted to ask you one other question, and I think in light of the time, I cannot ask all the questions that I still have. But for example, I read in the newspaper today that the gas price peaked again very much. So in light of this whole crisis, from your perspective, do you think governments have learned, and how ready are we for upcoming winter and the potential price volatility that comes with that?
So yeah, there is still volatility in the financial markets, and the financial markets expect natural gas price to stay elevated during the next winter. When you compare the TTF, which is the benchmark in Europe for natural gas prices, with the Henry Hub, which is the respective in the United States, you see how this gap that has always been there between the TTF and the Henry Hub has grew wider in the last 2 years, and it will stay more elevated also for the next 3 years. And we are talking about a difference of between 3 and 4 times. So the TTF is between 3 and 4 times more expensive than the Henry Hub, the natural gas in the United States. While I don't expect such a tight outlook as the one we experienced last year going forward, I think that still there are reasons for concern, and I really much hope that governments learned the lesson, and they are doing everything in their power to move away from this untargeted and price suppressing type of policies towards more income support that is targeted, tailored, and also that drives the green transition in households.
More structural. Yeah, thank you so much, Giovanni. I wanted to also ask Hanna a question, because you highlighted this aspect of specific groups in society being more vulnerable to energy poverty than others, based on the survey that you presented. So you mentioned specifically elder women being vulnerable. Do you see any efforts from the Hungarian government to tailor policy specifically to this problem, and were also similar problems seen in countries beyond Hungary? Is this a trend that applies to all Central Eastern European countries, or how does it work?
Thanks, Rutger. I think it's a very good question. No, I mean, the first short answer is no, there's no specific policy targeted for elderly women. There are a few things I wanted to mention that I mean, the second, I don't think, I mean, even the survey was a non-Hungarian one, but at least relevant for the other countries in ComAct. But I dare to assume it's definitely relevant in the sea and southern region of Europe. And I would even venture to say that elderly, I mean, depending on the welfare net for the country, but elderly women, given all the social constraints in their lives and the way they earn, that how life is, and that they tend to live longer their husbands, that they tend to be everywhere in Europe more prone to energy poverty than at least under certain circumstances. So, but I mean, this very much depends on a set of local circumstances, but I would definitely find it safe to say that this is a very important group in the region. At the same time, there's something I need to emphasize. That the survey took place, I also said it in a multi-apartment building in cities. I didn't mention cities, which was a mistake I made. So this is, we did in our sample, we did not have large families with many children. And that's another, so this is, they don't, we had people living in small apartments, maximum 70 square meters. So there's so this is just, I would say, one face of energy poverty, and it's a multifaceted phenomenon. And so there is definitely the question about poor families, low income families with children. I mean, we had few children in our sample, and the people who they had 2. So that's a very different setup. Yeah, I think.
Okay.
I hope I answered all your questions.
Yeah, you answered the question clearly. I mean, I mean, there's these specific groups that the issue still continues to be there. I mean, I didn't get from your answer that there was specific policy being made to this group, but
No,
nevertheless,
definitely.
there's other social dimensions that should be taken into account,
Yeah.
and that it is a trend that can be seen in other countries as well. Yeah, so that's a clear answer. I wanted to go quickly to Alice, because you also showed some graphs showing the impact, I think also of the euro crisis on Greece, that there was a steep increase of energy poverty, basically when the crisis really came to Greece and had like heavy impact on society. And I saw in these graphs that there was like a focus on the heating of buildings in winter, but I know that Greece is also known for beautiful summers, and I wondered if there is also an issue with cooling in summer in Greece, and if that is also something that's considered when we're talking about energy poverty, the need for people to use an air conditioner or something else. The issue is like clearly like a problem. Like I saw that in the UK, due to the air conditioning demand of electricity during the day, they turned on coal-fired power plants again, which sort of creates this cycle. So I wondered, does the summer energy poverty also is it present in Greece, and is that something that you also look at in your indicators?
Yeah. Definitely, it is present. And while examining energy poverty in different areas of Greece, we are actually identifying new energy poverty, hidden energy poverty, and I will give an example. Definitely what you are saying, it's true, but because of the very high temperatures that we are facing the last 20 years here in Greece, and this is something that is increasing, the majority of houses have air conditions, not a good quality, and also we have another program for changing the appliances, air conditions or refrigerators to A++, but I'm not considering this as a response to the energy crisis. That is why I didn't present it. It's that so that the majority of households, they have air conditions, so it's somehow easier to address energy poverty or high temperatures during the summer, but in any case we are evaluating also this indicator. And unfortunately, the Eurostat graph didn't have this information about what is happening in summer. But now, since we are providing the technical assistance to 16 municipalities, and in the coming months to 20 municipalities, we are also evaluating that. Another hidden energy poverty that we never consider that it is here in Greece is the energy poverty during the summer period for temporary workers. As you know, Greece is full of islands. We have season working areas, meaning in the island starting from May until the end of October. So the question, because now we are evaluating the energy poverty rates in 13 islands, is what is happening with all those people that they are moving from their houses in Athens or in Thessaloniki or in other central Greece areas to the islands to work approximately 15 to 16 hours a day, and this is a fact, and what is happening with the buildings that they are living, and if they have the conditions or those conditions that they making them feel more comfortable and make them easy to rest for the next day. So we are now evaluating what is happening during the summer period, not for the permanent citizens, but for those people moving from one area to another just for the summer jobs. So when examining energy poverty, not only Greece, I'm sure that the same thing is in Hungary, in Romania, and Bulgaria. As deeper as you go, we are finding new forms of energy poverty that those need to be evaluated in a different way, and we need to manage all these indicators in order to have a result, in order to address actually the problem and to address it in the best possible way.
Yeah, I have also one other follow-up question, because you mentioned several policies that have been implemented to increase the renovation rates, but also to generate renewable energy. And I wondered, are these policies linked to each other, or are they separate programs? So for example, would it be good to install your PV panels if you're heating your home with electricity, for example, but your home is not insulated, as you indicated that many houses are not indicated? Are there any criteria in which these policies can be combined or in which they are attuned to each other?
As I said in my presentation, probably is not clear, especially for the program about installing the photovoltaics on the rooftops. We have at INZEB strong objections on that. We have discussed it with policymakers that it's not normal to have a program that is first come, first served without evaluating first the condition of the house.
Yep.
During the last 10, 15 years, so many renovation programs under the I'm Saving program have been implementing. So the priority to those buildings that have already upgraded their energy status should be considered, but it's not considered. So we are having separate measures, installing photovoltaics in a class F, E, I don't know, the lowest class. On the other hand, we are not prioritizing the already renovated buildings. So it needs to be somehow managed to have something that follows, one step follows the other if we want to have a real result. If we really want to discuss about INZEB buildings or to have buildings that they are independent from energy, from fossil fuels, from electricity, from whatever is needed to have the energy services in the household.
Thank you, Alice. Okay, I will give you, in light of the time, all one last statement. So if you would be advising the government in the country where you're living, what is this one thing that you would really want to tell the Prime Minister that he should do if the energy crisis comes back to life? Alice, to start with you, and then we go to Hanna, and then we end with Giovanni.
Yeah, set clear priorities, implement them wisely, and find solutions for smart financing. Public funding is not will not be available to cover all the needs of the country.
Okay, thank you. Hanna.
I would have one message. Please restart the subsidies for encouraging people to invest in energy efficiency in their homes, and going back to what Giovanni was saying, and leave the untargeted subsidies of prices behind.
Thank you, Hanna. Then Giovanni.
Well, my sentence is very much along the lines of Alice and Hanna, especially after, you know, the 110% bonus program that has been rolled out in Italy that covered 110% of the expenses for renovation in buildings for everyone, no matter of the income level, and that was extremely expensive measure. I think, if I remember correctly, we are in the around the 100 billion euros. So it left a massive mark on public finances. So to target these measures, because otherwise it's impossible to do it.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. I see that Mathilde is also with us, and then I will give you the last word, Mathilde, of the panelists, to maybe say also something about the group that the European Commission has issued, which is maybe also a platform where some of the attendants of the webinar might be interested in.
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry, I only reconnect now. I only see your email. Well, thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to finalize this. It was a very interesting talk. Just yes, we are setting at the European level a new group of stakeholders, and on energy poverty. It is to mirror the existing group on energy poverty that we have at member states level, and which is a group within the member states can exchange good practices and also different feedbacks from policy that they have tried, implemented projects. Also, it's a very good thing. We are now setting this stakeholders group to mirror it, and also to prepare this new recommendation that I talked a little bit earlier. So yes, it's it's important that if anyone has not been involved in it and is willing to participate, please write to me or to the Commission to be included in this. I think that the governance on energy poverty at several levels and the multi-actor governance is very important, including in all the member states. We are trying to give the example and to tell the member states to have also this multi-actor governance. It's one
nice.
of our recommendations.
Thank you so much, Mathilde. Thank you also, Giovanni, Hanna, Alice, our technical expert in the background, for bringing back up the webinar. And thanks to all the participants that have been with us. It was a real pleasure to be here with you, and we will definitely continue the conversation, if not in the stakeholder group that you just mentioned, Mathilde, also through different channels. Have a great afternoon and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.